Cannabis by Box Brown, or Cannabis in American History by Box Brown, I should say. This is the paperback version. A subscriber reminded me in the comments the other day that this did come out in hardback, and I think a few of Box Brown's books did come out in hardback, contrary to what I said in a previous video when we looked at Andre the Giant. So yeah, this is the paperback version, though, and we'll get to the build of the book. But Box Brown, if you've seen any of my previous videos, I've looked at the book on Andre the Giant's life and legend, and I've looked at Tetris in previous videos. I'll leave a link in the description below for those. But this is Box Brown's typical Box Brown look at cannabis and how it worked its way into American life and culture, and its criminalization of cannabis more than anything. Certainly the demonizing of cannabis. Like, it's called an American history, but it's very much the story of how cannabis was first introduced to America, and then how it was criminalized and classified and demonized in many, many different ways over the kind of 60s and 70s and times before that, to be fair. But either way, the book itself starts out laying down the foundations of what cannabis is and what it does to you, and how it chemically kind of alters balances in your brain to make you do certain things and make you feel a certain way. And then it introduces how it was worked into Indian kind of religion and mythology and all that type of thing. And that bit I really enjoyed at the start, because I just love folk tales. The older I get and the more of these videos I do, I say this sentence all the time, but I really do enjoy a folk tale because they're so off the wall and crazy and mental, and you can see how our interpretation and how our lives have been influenced by these really crazy stories. But needless to say, these early stories show how Indian folk tales and mythology and religious kind of mythology showcases how cannabis first started to be exploited, really. And so it goes back quite a way, and it shows how it developed a reputation among the colonial occupying power of Britain and England in India, and how they were trying to control it and trying to find out more about it. And a lot of kind of the Christian and established churches coming over from England and further afield really were demonizing it and were saying that it is a devil substance, really, that it is a drug that shouldn't be used. It should be banned. They find out that various people in India drank or ate cannabis in various forms, really, and so it was part of their culture, really. And so they were trying to almost separate that part of the culture out, because religion and civilized society, if you want to put it like that, saw it as a bad thing, as a negative thing. And it's crazy how that mindset would continue through wherever cannabis went. It was always kind of demonized by those religious powers that are in control of certain countries, and certainly certain people and certain powers having an impression of what cannabis is and what it can do to a person, and so they outlaw it and ban it. And it's not all sugarcoating. It does show how, you know, abuse of it and overuse of it can affect a person, but it's also showing how it can have a positive effect as well. And so it's trying to present a far more level-headed argument towards what cannabis is, while showcasing and going through the story of how it was criminalized. And so eventually the drug makes its way to Mexico and makes its way up into America, traveling via Mexicans who were, again, using it just like the Indians were doing, but maybe not as in a religious context, really. They were using it more as a kind of relaxation drug, as a kind of a recreational drug, that type of thing. But either way, it worked its way into American culture via Mexico and things like that. And then it just grew and grew and grew to the point where, when the federal government started inputting and putting in place, rather, narcotics and drug enforcements. And that's when the book really focuses on a gentleman named Harry J. Anslinger, I think. Anslinger? But either way, Anslinger. We'll go with that. He would be, as Box Brown says, cannabis's greatest enemy, because he was appointed as the commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And initially he would focus on the hardline drugs, you know, cocaine and heroin and all that type of thing, because he had no interest in cannabis. But then as time went on, he could really see that he could manipulate the press and manipulate the story of cannabis to make his job and make his position more secure, get more funding in. So he very much was utilising cannabis to make his own position better in many ways. And he certainly wasn't afraid to lie left, right and centre about cannabis and use established press kind of, connections to get negative, bad stories out there about people consuming cannabis and then going on killing sprees, about people, dying in all manner of different ways and shapes and forms from cannabis. He also made cannabis a very racial thing, targeting Mexican people and black people, and almost kind of using cannabis as a way to divide and conquer, really. And that comes off when he is really going after heavy, jazz musicians and turning the jazz musicians and saying they become rapists and things like that from smoking cannabis. And so a gigantic chunk of this book really follows his story in terms of him forcibly creating lies and misinformation about cannabis, going against established doctors, going against a lot of things. Like, for example, I think one part of the book they interviewed like a load of different scientists or doctors or psychiatrists, and one of them came out with one negative story about cannabis, and that was the one that he ran with and he promoted more than anything else. And he eventually got kind of cannabis and the image of cannabis to a point where it was vilified totally, that it was demonized, that it was this horrific drug because it caused all these different problems in society. But a lot of it was made up directly by him. And this book, more than anything, is interesting to see how the government organizations, how the press, how radio stations, how everything was manipulated gigantically by this person and by that organization to get something, to get recognition for their department, to get something that they want, really. But it's mad how all of the stories and a lot of the stories he made up are still a fundamental part of how people perceive cannabis to this day, and how they've kind of heard about it through these negative stories. And it really is fascinating how misinformation and fake news essentially travels and changes laws and impressions. And it certainly does go forward past that period where that Harry J. Anslinger, or whatever his name is, came out of office. And it does come more or less to the modern day to see where we are now. But it certainly is, for me anyway, the most interesting part was that part where he was manipulating the press and taking reality and taking real stories and just tweaking them and turning people into just these fake characters to do what he wants, to get what he wants most, which is the criminalization of cannabis. And yeah, it's a crazy story when you read it and when you put fact against fiction and all that type of thing. And certainly Box Brown has done his research exceptionally well, to be fair to him, and has presented it here in a really easy to understand, straightforward manner. It's all typically drawn in Box Brown's amazing, unique art style. It is a paperback book, as I said earlier. This one is printed by Self-Made Hero, which I believe printed it in Britain and possibly Europe, possibly a different printer or different organisation printing and distributing it in America, but Self-Made Hero here, and it is sewn binding, a really well made quality paperback, to be fair. Matte finish paper inside, and it's around about 240 pages or so. It's a very quick and fun and interesting read, and certainly if you're interested not just in cannabis, but if you're interested in how stories are manipulated by government organisations and by the press and all that type of thing, it's a great book for that, to giving you an insight and giving you a shocking truth on how easily the public can be manipulated into thinking and perceiving something is so negative. But either way, Box Brown, Cannabis and American History, thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one.